now for the movies. So I'll go ahead and do mine just because it rolls right in. I kind of on my soapbox. But Revenge of the Sith, Obi-Wan versus Anakin on Mustafar. Again, lots of emotion there. You got this kid who Obi-Wan was never supposed to be his master in the first place. He ends up being, his master.
Yeah.
They get thrown into a war together. They turn into, best friends. They're doing all this stuff together. They're broing it up. Anakin turns bad. And so you've got all that emotional weight there. And as a 12 or 13-year-old, whatever I was when it came out, like, it was the only missing piece of Star Wars. How does Anakin turn into this machine Vader? Because we knew it had to happen. Just don't know how. And obviously, like, the scenery looks like hell. That's what George Lucas wanted it to look like.
Yeah.
You've got those blue sabers clashing amongst all the lava and stuff, which really pops. They both trained for that, like, for months and did all their own stuff. Just so good. And as far as the prequels go, sometimes the CGI is like too much. And I feel like for whatever reason, they nailed it on Mustafar. I don't know if it's because they were doing something realistic like lava, so it was like something
I get what you're saying.
But, you watch some of it, like Geonosis does not look realistic at all. And then you've got, this looks really good. I don't know how they made it look so good, but they did. And then, of course, the story aspects and everything to it as well, on top of the choreography, action, the score, Battle of the Heroes. It's so good.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that with the CGI, but you're right. It doesn't really stand out. Maybe it's because, it really is overused with, like, the Geonosians, the battle droids. I think at that point you're like, this is a lot of digital stuff on the screen right now.
Yes.
So maybe without all of that, and maybe it doesn't feel as cluttered. I don't know. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
Also,
but no, go ahead.
You may know this fun fact, but when they were making the movie, if you watched it in theaters, you've never seen that version again because they forgot to add sweat in on Anakin and Obi-Wan. And so if they're sweating at all, it's just naturally from them doing all the choreography. But then on the DVD and everything, they had to go in and add more because they're like fighting on a lava planet, and they didn't account for that. So I thought that was interesting. But George loves to tinker with post-product. So
he does. Yeah, sometimes a little too much.
Yes,
I did not know that. That's interesting. I'm glad I saw it like 3 times in its original state.
And you'll never see it again that way. Now they're real sweaty.
Yeah. No, it is. It is a good scene. The choreography itself, like you mentioned, is just incredible. Like,
it'll never be better.
There's no lull in that battle. Like, it's just constant.
They punch each other.
But it is. It's just the culmination.
Like they punch and kick.
Right?
Yeah.
No, they do. It's crazy. You mentioned it. Like, the idea that there used to be a time where we didn't know how Anakin Skywalker became Darth Vader, right? Like, it was just this thing that was adrift in George Lucas's mind. And so to see that come about after investing so much in this character story, it was a heavy, heavy moment. And it's coming, but, like, it doesn't really blunt the trauma of it. It's like, especially because it's the two of them, right? Like, it could have happened any other way, but it's Kenobi and Skywalker.
Even the promotional materials, you knew what was coming, because they put that on everything. That 2 scene of them fighting each other there when they're like grabbing, that was on literally everything. And then with The New Hope, you knew that it had to be Obi-Wan beating Anakin.
Yeah.
Because of what Vader says. Now that brings up different meaning now with Kenobi out there, but at the time it didn't. So you knew it had to be Obi-Wan. You just didn't know the severity or how they got there.
Yeah, and I think that's a credit to how well, whatever your complaints with the prequels were, it is a credit to how well the story was told, right? When you know how something is going to go, and it still draws you in, and it's still compelling. I mean, there are elements of storytelling that carry over between stories, but it comes down to how you tell it as to whether it really grabs you or not. So, despite the fact we all knew what was coming, and it still really, really drew us in. I mean, I think that is a credit to how well the whole story was told, but especially that story between Anakin and Obi-Wan.
And how about Obi-Wan saying, it's over. I have the high ground. I mean, what an iconic line now. Like,
it is.
That's supposed to be the thing that
like
deters a Jedi. Like,
yeah,
I know you got the Force and all, but I got a little bit, I'm up on a higher elevation than you.
I have to think that Ewan McGregor never thought that he would hear those words so many times throughout his life just from that movie. But it took on a life of its own. It's kind of like it's kind of like the hello there, right? Like
yeah. So what's yours?
He hears a lot. Mine's been the same for a while, and it's from Return of the Jedi. It's the scene in the throne room, right? Dueling between Vader and Luke, where Luke throws down his saber and says his iconic line, right? I'm a Jedi like my father before me. That's always been my favorite. I think I've grown to appreciate it more as I've gotten older. Yeah. And more as the story's really been enriched by stuff before it. I mean, you could talk a lot about this scene. In fact, go watch, again, I think we mentioned this last week, but like Will from Diamond Fades has been doing a series of like people's favorite scenes. And he did Beyond the Dune Sea, and it was this scene. Mm-hmm. So go watch that because they talk about it for like an hour and a half, and it's awesome.
They do. That's a good one.
It is. But to more briefly explain why I love it so much, you track back a little bit to Vader's perception of Luke and the Emperor, right? And when they meet up and Luke kind of surrenders himself, he says a few things. He says, "You don't know the power of the dark side," right? And he says, oh gosh, it just left my mind. He says,
"It's too late for me."
What does he say about himself? Yes, goodness gracious. He says, "It's too late for me, my son."
That's a killer line right there.
It is, right? Acknowledging Luke as his son, which is therefore acknowledging he's Anakin Skywalker.
And knowing he can't do anything about it.
Right. And so Vader
or thinking he can't.
Yeah. Vader has this perception that you can't escape the dark side. It's going to win. Luke's either going to die or join the Emperor, right? Those are the two options of how this is going to play out. And so we get up to the Death Star, and Palpatine's doing the same thing with Luke, right? He's trying to create this situation where Luke feels he has no choice, right? Your friends are going to die. You better kill me, right? You better get mad and strike me down, right? Same thing with Anakin. Well, if you want Padme to live, you should probably join the dark side. So this ploy of like, you can't save what you want to save without giving in, right? And so Luke gives in a little bit, right? But then he draws back. He's still fighting Vader. Then Vader does the same thing as his master, right? Oh, well, if you won't join, maybe I can get your sister. So then Luke loses it, right? And this is where
it really works.
It does. And that's if you listen to the soundtrack in this moment and watch what's happening, you're watching Luke fall. And there's like a really somber note to the music here because you're like, oh no, like it's happening. And then he beats the fool out of Vader. He cuts off his hand, and then Vader. I have to imagine Vader's laying there like, here it is, right?
Uh-oh.
I was right about the dark side. I was right about how this was going to end. There's no escaping this, right? Just the way I couldn't escape it, my son's not going to escape it. And so I love that in that moment, he watches his son do something different, right? He sees this idea that the dark side can't lose, that the dark side will always win. But then he sees Luke Skywalker say, you know what? This is not what I'm choosing. He casts his lightsaber down. And he doesn't say, you're not going to get me because I'm better than my father, right? He says, I'm a Jedi like my father before me. The good I'm doing, what I'm choosing now is because it's what my father chose at one point. And so just being able, like, really restores to Vader Anakin in that moment, right? Like, hey, you can choose differently. Look, I'm doing it, right? And so Vader watches his son choose something that he didn't think was possible. And then in the same instance is reminded that he once did that, right? Like we talked about it. Anakin tried to do the right thing for so long before finally slipping and falling. And so I love that moment so much because in that moment, Luke demonstrates to Vader that there was a choice, and that because there was a choice then, there's also a choice now.
Yep.
And then we see Vader decide, you know what, it's not a done deal, right? Like there is a way to escape this thing, and then the rest plays out, and he kills the Emperor. But
he really does, though. He really does die.
yeah, in form.
Yeah.
But man, I love that scene, and I love it every time, just because that view of Luke Skywalker almost as a Jedi, right? We talk about how Jedi are guardians, really almost standing as a guardian between Vader and Palpatine in that moment. It's such a cool visual, and so man, that's always been my favorite scene. I don't know how something will upend it, because to me it ties together what Star Wars is for me.
It can't.
And so it's so good.
Also,
that's
scene,
the brief version of why I love it.
Yeah. Well, that scene is like a train wreck of 3 big story points all converging into one as well. If you look at it, because you've got Luke's story barreling in, like because Yoda says you still have to face Vader. You're not a Jedi yet. You still have to face Vader. And what it turns out is Yoda assumes defeating Vader. And that's not what it is. He does defeat Vader and then walks up to that line of the dark side and then turns and says no. And so that's Luke's story going up to there. You've got Anakin's and Vader's story both coming to an end at the same point. Mm-hmm. And then you've also got the Emperor's coming to an end as well, which wasn't. But like he's doing that same trick again. He's like, I got Anakin this way. I'm going to get Luke this way. It's going to be great. And then it doesn't. Right? Anakin gets to right that wrong. And so it's an ending 6 movies in the making. It's so good.
Yeah. And it carries weight because, like you mentioned, Luke does fall. Like briefly, temporarily, he falls to the dark side, right? And so he doesn't pursue that path, but it'd be different if Luke never struggled with it and was like, oh, it's fine, it's the dark side, everybody can resist. But he actually does get there for a moment and is still able to choose differently. And I think that's what really sways Vader. That he saw Luke experience the same thing he did, but choose something different. Man, it's good stuff.
Well, not that I'm crazy about the sequel trilogy at all. Specifically, Episode 9, it's my least favorite. But at the very end, where you see Palpatine doing the same things he did in Episode 6, like trying to trick Rey the same way, it's consistent. And then also, like, who's the only person to ever train Rey in the Force? Essentially, it's Luke, right? With hints of Leia. And who trained Leia? Luke. So you're going to try to tempt her the same way Luke was, and then it's the ultimate Skywalker victory where the Palpatine chooses to not be a Palpatine, essentially. Like I don't like it, but again, that kind of, it checks out, and it's very similar to this scene. So if it's something they're going to rip off later on, it must have been good.
Yeah.
Must have been a good scene.
Yeah. It's almost like Rey chose to be a Skywalker. They should have put that in there somewhere.
Awkwardly at the end, after she kisses Ben Solo. So speaking of runner-ups, my 2 runner-ups were the kiss and Rey Skywalker, and the Canto Bight scene. Those are my runner-ups. No.
Winners.
As far as runner-ups go, this one was up there for me, The Return of the Jedi, because honestly, if you're following my train of thought, you've got Ahsoka, you got the correct viewing order of all Star Wars duels, if you want to watch it as Anakin's story, is you watch Anakin versus Obi-Wan in Episode 3. Mm-hmm. Then you watch Anakin versus, I want to say timeline-wise, it would be Anakin or Vader versus Obi-Wan. Then it would be the Rebels versus Ahsoka. Then it would be versus Luke in Episode 6. I think that would give you a nice full picture of Star Wars.
Yeah.
If you did that. So that one was up there for me. And then also Duel of the Fates is up there. And
Duel of the Fates is up there for me.
I think the Death Star run, really cool, like in Episode 4.
Oh, man. Oh, I mean, when you watch that movie for the first time, and you watch, it blows you away the first time you watch it. Han Solo comes
blows the Death Star away, too.
Yeah, no, that's a good one. Duel of the Fates is good.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some really good scenes.
I think the Yoda and Luke Skywalker scene's pretty good in The Last Jedi. I mean, it's not like top whatever,
Oh
but it's
no,
probably my
yeah, no.
favorite sequel scene.
That scene is very consistent with the rest of Star Wars in terms of
It's a
what
good fit.
Yoda
It's like
tells
it's a
Luke.
good Luke Skywalker. Like, if you would be like, "Oh, I hate Disney Luke Skywalker," get in line, whatever. But
Yeah.
that scene, I like the fact that that has to happen. That Yoda has to be
Mhm.
like, "You don't get it yet," and he
Yeah.
has to push him one more time. I'm cool with that. Han Solo talking to Ben Solo, the 7 and 9, where they parallel. That's good storytelling there. I don't want to
I like
completely
that.
leave the sequels out. Like, there's some good scenes there too.
Yeah, no, all of my issues with the sequel movies had more to do with the storytelling they chose. There are some really good moments in there that are very Star
Very
Wars,
Star Warsy.
especially in terms of how it deals with some of the characters. Like Yoda, we see regret. We see him trying to make up for it in the original trilogy. And then we see he's moved past it, right? Like he's learned some things and he's trying to pass that on to Luke. So you do kind of
Yep.
see a full arc for Yoda
Yep.
throughout that scene. So yeah, no, that is a good scene. There are some good things in there.
There are. So, I mean, I think the main takeaway from this entire episode is like, it's really hard to choose favorite scenes, but there are some
It
that
is.
just
There's a lot of good
they
stuff.
really knock it out of the park. And so I think we did an okay job at that.